But the name in terms of how you're actually pronouncing this is a little complicated. If you want to give some color on that.
Yeah, so for me, it's Scots Gaelic. If you know, this might be an ass backwards way of saying it, but if you know how to say it, you're best to ignore the letters because the letters will sell you wrong.
That's true for English, like half the time too. So
it's true. And so for me, it's just Rudvor, and I just think of Rude and then separate word VOR, Rudvor. And in Scots Gaelic, the M and the H together make a V sound. So Rudvor is the trade name for this spirit. So there is no Rudvor distillery. This is from a somewhat well-known Highland. It is Highland, right? It's Highland region on the label, isn't it?
So this one does say Highland region, yeah.
Thank goodness. I like it when I get it right.
That's great.
and so this actually, how much to tell you, actually. Right. So this corporation put a lot of this distillery's peated product into famous grouse.
Yeah. That's telling more. I think in Joshua's video he says a famous blend.
Oh, well done. Well done, that man. So I may have said too much. Oh, there you go. Here comes the cease and desist. So, having said that, see if you Google Rudvor, the internet will tell you. Yeah. So we're dancing a dance here.
Am I allowed to talk about which one it came from? Because I know.
Yeah. Well, so here's the So here's the funny thing: it's how you do it, right? You can say, "I read on the internet that Rudvor is this distillery."
Sure.
Right? I could say the same thing. I'm choosing not to.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, but right? I did somewhere on the internet read that this distillery rhymes with Glen Turret.
I have read the same thing.
Interesting. We've both read the same article, I think. Yeah.
As you and I talked about in the interview, we're so proud of being an American-based independent bottler in the Scottish tradition, where the Scottish tradition was transparency. To now have conglomerates saying, not so sure I want you using that name there, we're like, but that defeats the purpose. This is why we use the name, is to say this came from there. It's a joining of the dots. And I sometimes worry that as whiskey geeks on the ground, these decisions aren't being made by people like us. They're being made by people in boardrooms who are, for whatever reason,
more financially driven decisions or fear,
right?
Whatever, ruin or tarnishing the name or something like that.
So that makes me sad. But back to the whiskey. Let's talk about happier things, because I'm going to get sad, and I've been so happy for the rest of these. One of the things I always do in my tastings, people will walk in and they'll say, "I don't like peated whiskeys." Those are the advanced ones. Oftentimes people will walk in and they'll say, "I don't like Scotch. They're all smoky peaty." And then you have to say, "Nope, that's not true. That's 10% of the industry, and even there, 2 of them are really light." So, and so people come in and say, "I don't like peated whiskeys."
Right. It just takes your grandfather opening Lefroy once when you were 12 and you smelling it from across the room that you're like, that? No.
Right. And so I always like to make a difference between Isla peat and Highland peat. Yeah. And if you're looking at Isla peat, you're looking at more medicinal, more salty, much more coastal. If you're looking at Highland peat, you're looking at something that's more smoke driven, more wood smoke driven.
Sure.
And you can get a fragrance out of there that you're not going to get out of the Isla peats.
Yeah. And so much of this, it really has to do with the vegetation that's growing in that area is a lot of it.
Correct.
And so the ocean probably plays a little part too.
Well, the great part of this is historically speaking, the bottom half of Isla was submerged for hundreds of thousands, millions of years. I'm not a geologist. I'm a whiskey bottler and part-time philosopher. Right. But I do know that half of the island was submerged. That's the half of the island where their peat comes from. So you are going to have decomposed sea matter going in there. Yes, there's also sphagnum moss, and that sphagnum moss is part of the decomposing matter in there as well. For the Highlands, it's going to be more heather driven, tree driven. In Islay, there's not an awful lot of trees. All of those Atlantic winds and gales are coming in. It's hard to be a tree growing on Islay. But Highlands of Scotland, traditionally, much more in the way of trees and decomposing wood, decomposing heather. You're going to get something more floral, something more fragrant. And like I say, you're going to get more of that, burnt wood than you are burnt earth.
Sure. Yeah. I've heard some people say it's almost in some ways smokier what you're getting from the Highlands because it's more of the smoke that we're used to in almost barbecue or that sort of thing.
Exactly. I say exactly that. If you heard it on One Nation Under Whiskey, it would have been the same people leading the charge.
Yeah.
But yeah,
probably where I got it from. But yeah,
right. But it's a point that I think a lot of people miss. Peat is simply peat. All you're doing is burning the earth, and I think it's important to ask, well, what's the earth made of? In that particular place that you're getting this from.
And if you look at barbecue, I mean, there's different styles of barbecue depending on what kind of wood you're burning too. So it makes a big difference. And this is a very different style.
Which is why I have such a tough time when I meet, Americans down in places like Tennessee and Georgia and Florida, where they're saying, I don't like peated whiskeys, I like my bourbons and I like my ryes. And I'm saying to them, well, A, your bourbons and your ryes are using a lot of new charred oak in their maturation. And B, from Memorial Day to, I started something I couldn't finish. From Memorial Day to Labor Day.
Yeah.
What are you outside cooking, right? And it's like, how can you not like peated whiskeys? Right? You love burning things.
And there's so many now. I mean, some of these whiskeys you really get, and this is definitely no exception. I mean, like we said, barbecue itself, but there is a kind of meaty quality to this too. That sometimes that's a textural thing, but in this case, just the flavor of it is really meaty.
Right. But when I first put my nose in it, I'm getting fruity and I'm getting a little bit of smoky. But it's nice to have a smoke that's not the Islay smoke. But also when I first put my nose in it, I got porridge, which, there's a memory from the kitchen, right? I grew up hating porridge, but my grandparents loved porridge. My parents loved porridge. My mum didn't. My dad did. But they would have a block of porridge in their bowl and they might put some salt over it or they might pour some milk over it. Oatmeal gets you somewhat close for those that are familiar with oatmeal over here.
Now,
but it's certainly grain forward.
Yeah, and I can't think of the name of it. There was one, I always grew up on oatmeal and cream of wheat, and this is not quite either of those, but there was another one that my dad would try to throw into the mix when we were out of the other two, and I was never quite into it, but that's what's going on here, and it works better in the whiskey than it did at the breakfast table for me.
If you could go back and tell your dad that, I'm not going to eat this for breakfast, but I will drink it for breakfast if you can make that happen.
Give me a couple years, yeah. I'll be... Man, this was much more, I mean, especially a lot of the Islay whiskeys, you don't necessarily realize how sweet they are. I think, especially until like one of my favorite things to do, especially if someone's never tried it before, is you put, you can do with Ardbeg, especially, I think, because that is so intensely smoky up front. But if you leave it in the glass and just let it sit there, dry up, and then go smell the glass, that's when you really notice how sweet it actually is. And this one, to me, I haven't tried that with this yet, but this comes off a lot drier in general to me.
It is. It's definitely drier. And again, right, context. Is it coming in from the Altmoors? Is it coming in from the Altmore 30? Is that what's led to this being a little drier? Is it the Highland peat that's drying out? What's our cask maturation on this one?
This is second fill bourbon hogshead. So this would have been refilled.
So larger vessel, less surface area contact, less of the wood influence on that, more spirit driven growing into that. Second fill bourbon, not as much of the bourbon, not as much of the sweetness.
Sure.
Room to grow within that as well.
But
Yeah,
this
it's
was the one
interesting
that,
to me that the grain is so noticeable.
yeah, and
That's interesting.
that is that's a really interesting note too, because it's not something that leaped out at me at first, but it's one of those, and this happens all the time with, you're drinking with someone, especially someone you've tried this probably more than I have, I would say, even though I had to tell you what vessel it was filled in. But
We're already onto like our next,
yeah,
16 releases.
right.
Like
Yeah.
this one on the store shelf, I'm like, oh, I don't remember
Wow,
what we
that's out of
selected.
my head. Yeah. That
You're
makes
right.
sense. Um, Whereas I have to know this stuff because now I have to tell people about
Yes, you do.
it.
Yes, you do. And I want to support you in knowing it.
But the
I'm
baton
giving
has been
you the
passed.
practice.
Nice. Much obliged.
You're
But
welcome.
yeah, what I was going to say is it happens all the time where you could be nosing a whiskey for all this time and then suddenly someone says something and you're like, my God, that's all up in there. And there's some that could be power of suggestion, but a lot of times it just kind of clues you in to know what you're looking for. And this one in particular has a lot of notes that I feel like the more I sit with this, the more I'm going to get out of it, because I don't know that I've had a whiskey quite like this before. I've had other whiskeys that are using Highland peat, and this doesn't quite come off like Lecheg is using Highland peat, aren't they?
Correct. Yep. Correct.
So this doesn't quite come off like Lecheg either.
Bruichladdich are using Highland peat.
Bruichladdich, right? And this doesn't quite come off like that. It doesn't quite come off like Ardmore either. Like it's definitely its own thing.
Beautiful. Yep. Exactly correct. Exactly correct. That to me would be the comparison is to take Ardmore and put it next to this distillery and have a look at, okay, you're generally similar areas. You're generally similar peat. You may very well be malted at the same place. And I don't know this for sure, but you may be sharing, barley lots. There could be a lot in common there that if you wanted to be nerdy about it, it'd be worth researching further online and then putting them side by side. Just be careful that you don't wander into an Ardmore that was matured in a Lafroig barrel, or it will really throw things askew for you. It'll really affect the education.
Yeah, and they're owned by they're the same company, so that could happen quite a bit, I would imagine.
Right. Right.
This bottle in particular is one of the reasons that I love independent bottlings, because this is not necessarily something that you would find any other way. This is kind of like, again, we go back to, I trust you guys. I have no idea what this Ruadh business is. I've never heard that name before. Right. I look at the side here and I see, okay, there's a lot of smoke and earth, and there's familiar notes on here, but it's a completely different animal when you actually put it in the glass and drink it. And that's part of the fun, is it's a different experience from what you're going to get in almost anything, certainly anything that I've had before.
Yeah, there's another interesting wrinkle to this one is, so obviously this is the retail line. We also have the online releases, and we put out the blended malt single cask.
Oh,
that one right there.
Just showed up on my doorstep just the other day.
Look at you. But so that's a single cask of blended malt from Edrington. So they're, who do Edrington own? Well, Edrington happened to own Macallan, Glenrothes, formerly owned Tamdhu when that would have been produced, Highland Park, Glenturret Distillery. And
yes.
Again, right, if you were to find out who Ruadh were, you might find out that what you're drinking in the single cask of Ruadh may very well have been a component in that single cask blended malt that you've got behind you, and put them side by side see what happens when you take the isolated peat and you put it next to the peat as it made up a component in a blended malt.
So and again, this is hard because we're dancing around the name, I guess, a little bit, but I mean, this distillery that I had read somewhere that this stuff might be generally doesn't put out peated malt, do they? I mean,
Correct.
I don't see a ton of single malts.
No, this distillery, to my knowledge, the great disclaimer, does not have a peated release.
Yeah. Yeah.
And,
So
and again, I want to say I've only seen it from independent bottlers as well. I don't think I've seen. I'm sure Gordon and MacPhail own a ton of it.
Sure.
And if you think about the distillery, I can see the distillery label in Gordon and MacPhail bottles.
Sure.
But I haven't seen them.
Yeah, there's not an actual release yet that you could just walk into any random store and find, certainly, let alone many specialty stores. This one, as far as a personality goes, we were starting to say, like, you called out the Altmore 30 as being like Scottish Christmas, and I was saying that the Ruadh, and there's something about the name even too that seems like it could come from Transylvania, that like it just reminds me of Halloween, and the smell of it feels like a fall whiskey. I mean, I think I could enjoy this any time, but if it's going to remind me of a place, I don't know if it was you guys who I heard that from, or maybe that might have been a Dave Broom thing where he says, like, if you're having trouble trying to pick out notes, start with a season. And that kind of gives you this sort of like palette of flavors that you can pull from there. And this to me is definitely yelling fall.
I've never heard Dave say that. That's fantastic.
Okay, yeah. I think it was him. I'm pretty sure that was a Dave Broom thing. Yeah. He knows what
he's doing.
Yeah.
Well, I just had to do the
books. They're worth it.
Right? They really are. They're worth the price of admission.
Yeah.
I actually just stuck my nose back into the Altmore 30 and the Altmore 8 after going through the Ruadh.
Yeah.
And again, it's just that really... it really is the nice spent matchstick that I really like. It just smells comforting and warming.
Yeah. But then I'm running out of glasses, so I'm just smelling the 30 out of the bottle. But this, like, going back to the 30 after the Ruadh, I feel like I get more sweetness from the Altmore 30 at this point because this is such a drier, the peat is so much more kind of forward. Whereas trying that next to the fresh bourbon barrel Altmore, I wasn't getting much sweetness out of the Altmore at all. So again, like contextually, this is really, really changes a lot.
This has been fantastic, absolutely fantastic. And I'm sorry that I have to love you and leave you. It's
all good.
Lockdown schedules. Like now people are like, hey, can you do a 6 p.m. West Coast tasting? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's 9 o'clock for me because I will not. But like I say, thanks ever so much. I appreciate the opportunity. And even just hanging out with you has been fantastic.
Oh, this is awesome. This is, no. Hopefully we get to talk again soon. Yeah.
Oh, awesome. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, geez, I just put Anthony Levinson, the full name, into my phone today.
It's there. So we're there.
It's legit.
Awesome.
It's legit now.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thanks so much.
Cheers,
man.
mate.
All right. Good luck with everything else. Cheers.